Turn in the case will shock you. This story takes us to a quiet neighborhood in Kolkata, India, where the lives of an ordinary family were shattered by a shocking crime. The case of Hetal Parikh isn't just about what happened, it's about the lingering questions that remain unanswered even after decades. What truly happened that fateful evening, and was justice really served? If you enjoy unraveling stories filled with twists, mysteries, and hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Let's dive into this chilling tale that leaves us questioning everything. The story begins on March 5th, 1990, in Bhawanipur, Kolkata, at an apartment complex called Nand Apartments. It was around 5 in the evening when Yashomati Parikh, a devout woman who had just returned from her usual visit to the temple, arrived home. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, so she stepped into the lift, clutching her prayer beads, unaware that the events awaiting her would change her life forever. When Yashomati reached her door, she knocked, expecting someone to open it promptly, but no response came from inside. Initially patient, she knocked again, this time with more urgency, but still, silence greeted her. Minutes ticked by as her unease began to grow. She banged on the door louder and louder, her voice calling out, "Hetal, Hetal!" Yet no sound emerged from within. A cold sense of dread started creeping over her. The commotion began drawing the attention of neighbors. Curious and concerned, people gathered in the hallway, whispering to each other. Inside that house was Yashomati's 18-year-old daughter, Hetal Parikh, a bright and promising young woman. The crowd's anxiety mirrored Yashomati's, and someone suggested breaking the door. With a collective push, they forced it open, and Yashomati hurried inside, her heart pounding. The sight that met her eyes was chilling. Her daughter's clothes, the very ones she had worn earlier that day, were scattered across the floor. Every step Yashomati took seemed heavier. Her breath caught in her chest as she reached Hetal's room. She pushed the door open, and her world collapsed in an instant. Hetal lay lifeless on the ground, blood staining the walls and pooling around her. The stark red of the blood painted a macabre scene, every corner of the room soaked in tragedy. Yashomati screamed, a sound of unbearable anguish and confusion. The neighbors stood frozen, their horror evident as whispers gave way to silence. This was no ordinary tragedy. It was the beginning of a mystery so dark and complex that every attempt to uncover the truth would lead to more questions than answers. The Parikh family seemed ordinary from the outside. There were 4 members: Yashomati Parikh, her husband Nagaradas, her elder son Bhavesh, and her daughter Hetal. The family owned a successful jewelry shop that provided them with a comfortable life. While Nagaradas and Bhavesh managed the business, Yashomati dedicated herself to the home, and Hetal was a diligent 10th grade student at Valley Goldsmith School. Hetal's life revolved around her studies as she prepared for her board exams scheduled for March. She had dreams, aspirations, and a bright future ahead. But on the first day of March, as her exams loomed closer, no one in the Parikh household could have foreseen the storm gathering on their horizon. Early in the morning of March 2nd, Hetal Parikh packed her school bag and left for class just like she did every day. Living on the 3rd floor of Nand Apartments, her routine was predictable, leaving the house around 7 a.m. and returning by 1 p.m. However, this day brought an unsettling revelation. Upon her return, she told her mother, Yashomati, something that had been troubling her. "Ma, the security guard in our building keeps looking at me in a really dirty way. He even teases me sometimes," she confided, her discomfort clear. Yashomati, concerned but preoccupied with household chores, brushed off her daughter's complaint. "Don't pay attention to such things, Beta. Focus on your studies. Your exams are more important," she said, trying to ease Hetal's mind. But what seemed like a minor issue at the time was just the beginning of a much darker chain of events. The next day, Hetal didn't go to school, and Yashomati assumed she was tired or stressed about her exams. But on March 3rd, Hetal returned to her routine. That afternoon, she came home visibly upset. She told her mother that the security guard, a man named Dhananjay Chatterjee, had crossed a line. "Ma, he asked me to go to the movies with him, and he didn't say it politely," Hetal revealed, her voice trembling with anger and fear. This time, Yashomati didn't dismiss her daughter's words. Furious and alarmed, she decided to confront the matter. When her husband, Nagaradas Parikh, returned home in the evening, she recounted everything Hetal had told her. Nagaradas wasted no time and immediately filed a formal complaint with the apartment society. The society acted quickly, forwarding the complaint to the security service company responsible for hiring the guard. The initial resolution was swift The society removed Donanjay from his position at Nand Apartments. However, bureaucracy and negligence played a cruel twist of fate. The security company, instead of terminating Donanjay's employment, reassigned him to another apartment. Unbelievably, he found his way back to Nand Apartments through a different agency, resuming work with little consequence. Dhananjay Chatterjee, a 25-year-old married man, was known for keeping to himself. He didn't interact much with the residents, making him an enigma in the community. But his troubling behavior around Heddle painted a far more sinister picture. On March 4th, the security service company finally instructed Dhananjay to report for duty at another building. "You're no longer allowed to work at Nand Apartments," they told him. Yet, for reasons unknown, Dhananjay defied the order. March 5th, the day everything changed, dawned like any other. Nagaradas left early for his jewelry shop, his mind occupied with work. On his way out, he spotted Dhananjay loitering near the building. Although it struck him as odd, he didn't think much of it and continued on his way. Hetal had an exam that day. Like clockwork, she left for school in the morning and was expected to return home around 1:30 p.m. Meanwhile, Dhananjay, whose official duty hours were from 6 o'clock a.m. to 2 p.m., was seen in the building despite his reassignment. His presence was unauthorized, raising questions about his true intentions. Dhananjay Chatterjee's shift was officially scheduled to end at 2 p.m., but by 4 p.m., he was still lingering around Nand Apartments. The afternoon shift guard had already arrived, yet Dhananjay remained in the building, an unusual and suspicious move. Wearing his uniform, he seemed reluctant to leave. At one point, he went to the small room allocated for guards, retrieved a set of clothes from his bag, and changed into a pair of gray pants and a cream-colored shirt. For the next hour, he loitered in the society premises, pacing and glancing around. By 5 p.m., he was still there, and his presence had become increasingly conspicuous. It was 5:20 p.m. when Yashimati Parekh, following her daily routine, left for the temple. 5 minutes later, at 5:25 p.m., Dhananjay made his move. He headed toward the staircase leading to the third floor. Another guard noticed him leaving and called out, "Where are you going, Dhananjay?" Dhananjay replied casually, I need to make a phone call. I have to talk to my agency about my new posting. There's an issue I need to sort out." In 1990, mobile phones were a rarity, and even telephones were a luxury that only a few households owned. To make a call, one had to rely on these scarce resources. Dhananjay claimed he needed access to a phone on the third floor, and with that, he ascended the stairs. A few minutes later, at around 5:30 p.m., a man from the security agency arrived at the building. He was there to check whether the new guard assigned to replace Dhananjay had reported for duty. He asked the evening guard on duty, "Was a new guard here for the morning shift today?" The evening guard shook his head. "No, sir. Only Dhananjay was here for the morning shift." The agency representative frowned, clearly puzzled. "That's odd. Dhananjay was not supposed to be here at all today. He had been reassigned." Hearing this, the evening guard tried to explain. "He's still here, though. He said he had some work to do and went up to the third floor." This revelation surprised the agency manager even further. "Call him down immediately, Kisan," he said firmly. The evening guard called out loudly, "Dhananjay, come down!" From above, a faint voice replied, "Yes, I'm coming." Minutes passed. The next day, March 6th, the investigation took a sharp turn. The police questioned Hetal's father, Nagaradas, about any potential suspects. Without hesitation, Nagaradas revealed his suspicion. "There's a security guard in our society named Dhananjay Chatterjee. He had been harassing my daughter for weeks, even asking her to go to a movie with him. We had filed a complaint against him, and he was reassigned to another building. I believe he committed this heinous act out of anger and revenge." Yashimati was also brought in for questioning, and her account supported her husband's suspicion. She recounted the incidents of harassment Hetal had endured at Dhananjay's hands. Adding to the story, she mentioned an unsettling detail. "A watch was stolen from our house recently, possibly yesterday. I suspect Dhananjay might be involved in that too. And there's something else. Our building's lift operator saw Dhananjay going toward our floor that evening." The investigation deepened as the police turned their attention to key witnesses. First, they questioned the lift operator. He stated, "Around 5:45 p.m., I saw Dhananjay Chatterjee coming downstairs. However, I didn't see him going up earlier. I was likely in the bathroom at the time." But Hetal's mother mentioned that the lift operator had seen Dhananjay heading toward their house. That part, I'm not sure about. Next, the night shift guard was interrogated. He confirmed that from 5:25 to 5:45 p.m., Dhananjay had gone upstairs. He also added, "My manager arrived during that time and he spoke with Dhananjay. The police then summoned the manager to clarify the timeline. The manager explained his encounter with Dhananjay. Dhananjay had been reassigned to a new duty location, but he came here anyway. When I discovered this, I called out to him. He responded and came downstairs. I asked him why he was here, and he told me that he was planning to go to his village that evening. He said he had some free time and decided to fill in for duty at his previous location for just one day. The manager further revealed that after leaving the apartment, Dhananjay picked up his belongings and claimed he was heading to watch a movie before catching a train to his village. When questioned about the sudden trip, the manager explained he mentioned a family tradition. A child had recently been born in his village and he was going to participate in a ritual. I don't know how long he stayed there. Meanwhile, the investigation received a critical piece of evidence, Hetal's post-mortem report. The findings were grim. Her body bore 21 wounds and evidence of sexual assault was confirmed. The report noted that Hetal had been strangled and that the injuries suggested she was attacked with a knife after the assault. These chilling details painted a horrifying picture of the crime. The breakthrough in the case came on May 12, 1990. Over 2 months after the incident, the police tracked Dhananjay Chatterjee to his village and arrested him. Alongside his arrest, they recovered clothes he had worn on March 5th and a stolen watch that matched a description provided by Hetal's family. The police pieced together the sequence of events from that fateful day. At 5:20 p.m., Yashomati Parikh left for the temple. At 5:25 p.m., Dhananjay headed toward the third floor. The lift operator who might have seen him was in the bathroom at the time. The police theorized that Dhananjay found Hetal's door unlocked or that she might have opened it after recognizing him. Once inside, he carried out his heinous crime. He sexually assaulted her, strangled her to death, and inflicted multiple stab wounds in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence or stage the scene. At 5:45 p.m., Dhananjay calmly exited the apartment and descended to the ground floor, responding to the manager's call as though nothing had happened. With mounting evidence against him, the stolen watch and his behavior on the day of the crime became key points in the case. What had started as a routine investigation now pointed firmly toward Dhananjay as the prime suspect. After the horrifying events of March 5th, the evidence against Dhananjay Chatterjee seemed overwhelming. As the police pieced together the timeline, it became clear that he had approximately 20 minutes to commit the crime, between 5:25 p.m. when he went upstairs and 5:45 p.m. when he returned in response to the manager's call. By 5:50 p.m., Yashomati Parikh had returned to discover the tragic scene. At this point, all evidence pointed directly to Dhananjay. Witness statements, forensic findings, and circumstantial clues painted a damning picture. The question arose, was Dhananjay truly the murderer? Most people involved in the investigation were convinced of his guilt. And given the details, you too might consider him the culprit. Let's examine the case against Dhananjay. The prosecution established a clear motive. Dhananjay had allegedly been harassing Hetal Parikh for weeks. Her rejection, coupled with the humiliation of being transferred after her family's complaint, could have fueled his anger. Moreover, physical evidence tied him to the crime. A button from a cream-colored shirt, later identified as belonging to Dhananjay, was found in Hetal's room. The police also recovered a stolen watch that matched the description of one missing from the Parikh household. However, the evidence didn't stop there. When the police initially investigated the crime scene, they discovered a chain near Hetal's body. When questioned, Yashomati Parikh confirmed that the chain didn't belong to her family. Later, a cleaner employed in the building claimed it as his own, but added an intriguing detail. He had gifted it to Dhananjay. This revelation further cemented the connection between Dhananjay and the crime. In addition to the chain and the button, the prosecution argued that the motive was compounded by theft. Dhananjay was found in possession of the stolen watch, adding a third charge to his case: murder, rape, and theft. With all this evidence, Dhananjay was found guilty and sentenced to death by the trial court. The verdict didn't end there. Dhananjay appealed to the High Court, but the sentence was upheld. He then escalated the case to the Supreme Court of India, but the decision remained unchanged. In a final attempt to save his life, a mercy petition was filed before the President of India. However, this too was rejected. Over the years, Dhananjay's case became a topic of heated debate. Critics argued about the evidence, the fairness of the trial, and whether justice was truly served. Supporters of the verdict pointed to the brutality of the crime and the weight of the evidence against him. Meanwhile, Hetal's family continued to seek closure, their lives irrevocably scarred by the loss of their daughter. Finally, after 14 years of trials, appeals, and petitions, Dhananjay's execution date was set. He was scheduled to be hanged on August 15, 2004, India's Independence Day. The executioner, Nada Malik, was tasked with carrying out the sentence. As the final moments of Dhananjay Chatterjee's life approached, he was escorted by the police to his execution. Early in the morning, his hanging was scheduled to take place. On the way, Dhananjay turned to the officer accompanying him and asked a haunting question: "Sir, after my death, will the police find the real killer? Or will the case end with me?" The officer remained silent, unable to provide an answer. Dhananjay then posed the same plea to Nada Malik, the executioner. "Please," he said, "ensure that the real person who did this." Despite Dhananjay's pleas of innocence, the execution proceeded as planned. He was hanged, and when his family was informed, they refused to claim his body. Left with no choice, the police performed the last rites themselves. The case had reached its grim conclusion, but for some, the unease lingered. Nada Malik later confessed that Dhananjay's execution haunted him. "For days after the hanging, I saw him in my dreams," Malik admitted. "He would kneel at my feet, crying, 'Don't kill me, I haven't done anything wrong.' It left a profound impact on my life, and I could no longer carry out executions. That was my last one." He eventually left his work as an executioner and began selling religious items near a temple, seeking solace in spirituality. But even with Dhananjay gone, questions remained unanswered, and a strange twist began to emerge in the narrative. Let's revisit the events of March 5th and examine the gaps. At 5:20 p.m., Yashomati Parikh left for the temple. This aligns with the timeline. At 5:25 p.m., Dhananjay was seen heading upstairs. The lift operator, who initially stated he didn't witness Dhananjay going up, later testified in court that he did. Let's accept that he saw Dhananjay ascending. According to the police theory, Dhananjay entered Hital's home. But Hital was usually cautious. Her door was typically kept closed. So, why was it open that day? If it wasn't already open, why would Hital open it for Dhananjay? She knew he harassed her and had told her family about it. Being alone at the time, why would she knowingly let him in? One possibility is that Hetal might not have seen him clearly or was caught off guard. Another is that the door was already open, perhaps left ajar for some reason. This raises more questions. Assuming Dhananjay entered, the events unfolded as theorized assault, murder, and an attempt to stage the scene. But another glaring mystery arises: how did Dhananjay leave? When Yashomati returned from the temple, the door was bolted from the inside. If Dhananjay had left, who secured the door behind him? This case continues to raise critical questions. Let's consider the events and the lingering doubts that challenge the narrative. First, there's the issue of Dhananjay allegedly stealing the watch within 20 minutes. He left other valuables untouched, taking only the watch. Why would someone committing such a heinous act risk additional exposure by stealing a single item, especially when he knew it could incriminate him? And then, why did he keep that watch for 2 whole months, knowing it was direct evidence that could tie him to the crime? Such carelessness seems contradictory for someone supposedly calculated enough to execute such a crime and cover his track. Next, Yashomati's actions raise questions too. When she returned from the temple at 5:50 p.m. and found Hetal not answering the door, why didn't she try calling the landline inside the house? It was common at the time for families to have a home phone, and calling would have been a logical step if she thought Hetal might have fallen asleep after her exam. Instead, she immediately knocked and eventually pushed the door with the help of neighbors. This abrupt decision bypassed simpler explanations such as Hetal being unresponsive because she was resting or otherwise indisposed. Did panic override rational thought, or was there something else influencing her actions? Another critical gap lies in the timeline after Hetal's body was discovered. By 6:00 p.m., a crowd had gathered at the Parikh household, and the family was clearly aware of the severity of the situation. However, the police weren't called until 9:00 p.m., 3 hours later. Why was there such a delay? Instead of securing the crime scene, numerous neighbors entered the house, potentially compromising valuable evidence. Even more perplexing, Hetal's mother held her lifeless body and carried her to the elevator for a doctor to examine her. By then, the doctor pronounced her dead. Why didn't they notify immediately? Now let's address the stolen watch. Initially presented as a key piece of evidence against Dhananjay, the watch's credibility was later brought into question. The police traced the watch to the shop where the Parikh family had purchased. But then, the post-mortem report introduces a critical detail. It indicates evidence of sexual intercourse. Many took this as definitive proof of Dhananjay's guilt. Yet the report leaves room for interpretation. It does not conclusively state whether the intercourse was consensual or forced. Moreover, No DNA testing was conducted on the semen samples, a glaring omission that could have either incriminated Donanjay or exonerated him. This lack of forensic clarity opens the door to alternate theories. Could the intercourse have been consensual and unrelated to the murder? Was someone else involved who escaped suspicion entirely? Or was Donanjay, as he claimed until the end, an innocent man caught in a web of circumstantial evidence? At this point, the story transcends the question of who done it and reflects a broader issue: the societal and systemic failures that allowed such an outcome. Hetal was a young girl with dreams, perhaps unsure of her path but full of potential. Her life ended violently, leaving behind a void that can never be filled. And yet, instead of certainty, the case left a trail of doubts, unresolved mysteries, and unproven assumptions. The possibility remains that Donanjay committed the crime, fueled by rejection and rage. But it is equally possible that he was scapegoated by a society quick to pin blame on someone of a lower economic and social status. If he was innocent, then the real killer, someone capable of such brutality, may still be out there, their identity hidden by a cloud of misdirection. What do you think? Was justice truly served, or was an innocent man made to pay the ultimate price for a crime he didn't commit? How much did societal prejudices, rushed judgments, and investigative gaps influence the outcome? This case isn't just about Hetal, Donanjay, or the Parikh family. It's about the larger implications of how we seek justice in a flawed system. In the end, Hetal's dreams were cut short, her story left unfinished. We can only wonder who really took her life, and what does this say about the world we live in? The questions linger, demanding answers that may never come. The story of Hetal Parikh is a stark reminder of how fragile justice can be when unanswered questions linger. It highlights the importance of thorough investigations and unbiased perspectives in uncovering the truth. Whether Donanjay Chatterjee was guilty or a victim of a flawed system, the case leaves us with a chilling question. How often does the truth slip through the crack? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more thought-provoking tales, consider subscribing and leaving a comment. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories like this to you. Stay curious.